Well, good day, everyone. I'm back here at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park. I was here some 2 or 3 months ago to discuss a couple of high-profile ministers. Today I'm here to discuss a very tragic high-profile murder case. This is the assassination of Officer Ian Campbell, who was on duty with his partner, Karl Hettinger, in the Hollywood part of town. And Officer Campbell paid with his life for this case. On the night of March 9th, 1963, officers Ian Campbell and Karl Hettinger of the Los Angeles Police Department were riding in an unmarked police car. They pulled over a 1946 Ford Coupe about 10 o'clock p.m. that evening, because the Ford Coupe looked somewhat out of place, and there were two men inside: Gregory Ulas Powell, age 30, and Jimmy Lee Smith, age 32. Officers Campbell and Hettinger thought the car looked suspicious. They pulled it over. They didn't realize what they were getting into. These two slimeball scumbags had just recently pulled a series of liquor store robberies, and they were on their way to knock off another store when the officers pulled them over. Gregory Powell, that was the driver, and Jimmy Smith was in the passenger side. Officers Campbell and Hettinger ordered the two to come out of the car. They approached the car without their weapons, no guns. All they had was flashlights. Okay, mistake number one. They approached the car, and Jimmy Smith exited the car voluntarily, with his hand slightly up. Gregory Powell, however, was much more serpentine in his behavior. Gregory Powell, at the command of Officer Campbell, backed out of the car and twirled around with a gun in his hand, and completely got the drop on Officer Campbell. That was mistake number one, was approaching the car without weapons. Mistake number two: when Officer Campbell felt or saw the gun, he said to his partner Hettinger, "He's got a gun, give him your weapon." Second big mistake. LAPD and probably any other police department will tell their officers, you never, ever, ever, ever surrender your weapon. Because you do that, then the bad guy's in control, and you no longer are. And here's the really bizarre part: the officers were forced into Powell's car, the Ford Coupe. Officer Campbell was forced to drive at gunpoint. He was told to get on Highway 99 and go up to Bakersfield. That's over 90 miles from downtown Hollywood. 90 miles, go figure. What were they doing? So they did as the bad guys told them. They were routed onto a back road which led to a big onion field. And at that point, they were forced to get out of a car, and they both stood by a ditch that had been dug by some gas line workers a day or two before. I'm going to put a more extensive video that explains it more extensively in the description below. You can click on it if you're curious about more details. But at that point, Gregory Powell said to the officers, I was telling you in the car that I'm going to let you go as soon as we get out of the car. But basically, I've changed my mind. He said, have you ever heard of the Little Limburg Law? And Officer Campbell said, yes, I know about the Little Limburg Law. And at that point, Gregory Powell pulled the trigger, shot Officer Campbell in the mouth. He fell. And then at that point, according to Officer Hettinger, who managed to get away, the two of them began firing shots into Officer Campbell to make sure he was dead. There was nothing Karl Hettinger could do at that point except run. It was stone dark outside. It was well after midnight. He crawled through a barbed wire fence, cut his pants all up. He ran more than 4 miles, being chased by this lunatic, Greg Powell, who was looking for, he had a flashlight, was looking for him. He managed to escape. Miraculously, he found his way to a farmhouse where he called the police. He called the highway patrol. Meanwhile, Greg Powell was unable to find Karl Hettinger, so he went back to the murder spot and pushed Officer Campbell's body into the ditch. And then he said to his partner in crime, Jimmy Smith, look, let's split up. We lost the other officer. You circle around on the highway and see if you can see him. You get in the car and circle around, and I'm going to look for him. So he spent some time looking for Officer Hettinger, who miraculously managed to escape and couldn't find him. So just making a long story short here, the highway patrol received notice from the LAPD because they found the officer's abandoned car in Hollywood. The highway patrol, 2 highway patrol officers stopped Gregory Powell, and they arrested him. They found him, and they arrested him. They found Jimmy Smith the day after. The case went to trial. They were found guilty. They were sentenced to death, but they never died in the gas chamber. This is one of those cases like with Charles Manson and his crew of misfits. They too were sentenced to death, but they didn't die by the gas chamber because the Supreme Court of the state of California ruled the death penalty as cruel and unusual punishment. So they were all commuted to life in prison. So were these two, Jimmy Lee Smith and Greg Powell. The outrageous part is that Jimmy Lee Smith was granted parole so just a few years later. And Greg Powell, Jimmy Lee Smith, however, was violated on drug charges and went back to prison. Greg Powell was almost paroled. Now, Greg Powell was really the guy who committed the murders. Jimmy Lee Smith, yeah, he had a part of it, but I think Jimmy Lee Smith was basically playing follow the leader because Powell was such a take charge guy and very intimidating. So he was almost granted parole, this Greg Powell fellow. But fortunately, Officer Campbell's daughter fought it and got signatures and petitions, and the parole board listened to them, the appeals board listened to them, and Jimmy Lee Smith died in prison in 2007. Greg Powell died in prison in 2012, and unfortunately, Officer Campbell is here paying the ultimate price. Sad to say for Officer Hettinger, although he survived that night, he lived until he was 59 years old and died of liver failure. But that 28, 30 years that he lived were not happy years. This guy had a lot of trauma. Definitely he had PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Let's take a walk to Ian Campbell's grave. He wasn't treated well by the LAPD. I heard that he he became an alcoholic. He took to shoplifting because, well, it was just, he was acting out the extreme stress of it all. And He didn't die very well. He didn't die happy. Poor Hettinger. Rest in peace, Officer Campbell. I decided I've taken up another hobby, painting stones for the dead, and this is my stone for Ian Campbell. Respect. Look at him, 30, 31 years old. Yeah, 31 years old he was when he died. This is Officer Campbell's father. He was a MD. This is his mother, Chrissy Campbell. The LAPD made extensive changes to the way they train their officers, and for example, you don't give up your gun. There were several plus the way they approach when they make a traffic stop, the way they approach a vehicle, and there were all kinds of changes made. But PTSD was really, it wasn't anything that anyone even thought of. After the assassination of Officer Campbell, Officer Hettinger, who survived, wasn't even given treatment, wasn't given therapy. He was put on the job, back on the job that very week. Yeah, no wonder the guy broke down. Rest in peace, Ian. Ian Campbell did not die for nothing. The police were, the whole department improved as a result in just the way they handled their job. Last week I talked about that poor Kelly Thomas, the homeless guy that was beaten up and died by the Fullerton Police Department. Well, I think it's helpful also to realize the other side. Policemen have paid with their lives dearly because of bad guys like Gregory Powell, who don't care about life. They don't care about the sanctity of life and human beings. They don't. And there's rarely a job more dangerous than that of a police officer or a soldier in combat. And we need to pray for our officers so that a tragedy like Ian Campbell never happens. So rest in peace, Ian. My respect to you.